On this episode of the WildFed podcast,
I'm looking down and suddenly the throat of a great white shark coming up out of the water at me.
It's terrifying, breathtaking, awe-inspiring when you see a fish that big knock a big marine mammal into the air.
They date back over 400 million years. They have persisted while the dinosaurs have come and gone.
I don't want to be participating in something that can't be sustainable. But if once a year or every once in a while I wanted to take a shark, do you think this is ethical?
They have these very distinct migratory patterns. We see individuals arrive to the very same day after traveling thousands of miles.
When you look in the eyes of a shark, there's something quite frighteningly vacant.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when somebody is bitten.
It's got to be more dangerous driving the I-95.
People ask me, hey, I'm going to the beach on Cape Cod. What do I do? And I said, drive safely.
episode 64 of the WildFed podcast, Shark! Harpooning Great Whites for Science with Dr. Greg Skomal is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival produces a boutique line of natural supplements for stronger hormone systems, digestion, immunity, and more. Right now, until Friday, January 15th, the coupon code 2021GOALS gets you 15% off Surthrival's top sellers. This includes Surthrival's chaga extract, which is now back in stock. Avani and I went out chaga hunting just yesterday in New Hampshire's White Mountains and came home with a beautiful specimen, which we'll be using for tea over the next several months. Chaga is a medicinal mushroom that both modulates your immune system and is an adaptogen, helping you to better acclimate to stress, whether that's physiological, mental, or emotional. In addition to chaga, Surthrival's colostrum, elk antler, pine pollen, reishi, taboo, and vitamin D3K2 are all 15% off at surthrival.com with the coupon code 2021GOALS. WildFed is also brought to you by The Farmer's Juice. The Farmer's Juice fresh presses organic produce from local California farms into incredible juices and wellness shots that they deliver direct to your door. Each of their juices, which cost just a fraction of what you'd pay at the juice bar, contain a full pound of fresh produce, and they stay fresh for up to 30 days with nothing artificial added. They've got all the ingredients you're looking for, from sweet fruit juices to herbal green juices to anti-inflammatory and medicinal wellness shots, and they even have low sugar and ketogenic options available too. The Farmer's Juice believes that healthy soil makes for healthy plants and that makes for healthy humans. Go to thefarmersjuice.com and use the coupon code WildFed and get up to $8 off your order. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Shark! Anyone who lives close to the coast or has spent time in the saltwater knows how primal the human response to that word can be. Not to mention how hard it can be to run back to shore when you're waist deep in water. But the public perception of sharks isn't just primal fears, it's also fascination, as these charismatic top-tier predators have captured the imagination of the public, myself included. We no longer see them as just monsters of the deep, but bioindicators of the health of aquatic ecosystems, and as ancient megafauna that we share our beautiful blue planet with. And probably no other species of shark fascinates us more than the great white. Today I'm talking with Dr. Greg Skomal, who spends his summer months harpooning great white sharks by hand from the pulpit of a boat just a few feet off the water's surface. You heard that right. And though he's doing it non-lethally to implant acoustic monitoring tags, you could view him as the Atlantic's premier great white shark hunter. But Greg is hunting them for science, and that science is fascinating, especially given how little we know about this oceanic apex predator. In particular, he and his team are focused on understanding the predator-prey relationships of this species and adding to our surprisingly scant knowledge of this animal who, despite the many films, novels, news stories, and not to mention its 2,000 to 5,000 pounds of body mass, remains both elusive and mysterious. We'll talk about the white shark's natural and life history, how Greg finds them, and what provokes attacks on humans, and more. We'll talk about the white shark's natural and life history, how Greg finds them, what provokes attacks on humans, and more. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to the video we talk about in the beginning of this episode, where a great white breaches the water in what looks like an attempt to take Greg off the pulpit of the boat where he's standing with his harpoon and tag in hand. It's pretty harrowing to see. As someone who lives near, fishes in, and therefore shares water with these incredible animals, it was simply awesome to sit down with Greg and learn about this incredible species. A species that's been hunting Earth's water since long before humans or anything even beginning to resemble a hominin existed. A species so perfectly fit for life on Earth that one might consider them the ideal model of what adaptation to this planet should look like. After all, we are newcomers here. Sharks were here when we arrived on the scene, and if we can learn to better steward our oceans, they might just be here long after we're gone.
Dr. Greg Skomal, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Man, I've been really looking forward to talking to you, and it's been quite a while. We've been trying to set this up, but we're just coming out of your busy season. And thank you for hosting us out here, by the way.
Not a problem. It's great to have you here.
This is such a cool area. So we're in Cape Cod right now, and is this Buzzards Bay?
Yeah, we are actually just off Cape, technically. And
Okay.
so we're on the western side of Buzzards Bay, which separates the mainland from Cape Cod proper.
Okay. So much history here. I mean,
Yeah.
just so much, especially around the fisheries, obviously the whaling that was happening out in this area. And then on the way in, we saw gold cod on somebody's doorway there, and sort of talking about the history of the cod fishery here. And just, this is just a really neat place for us coming down from Maine. But I first learned about you from a news story I was reading. I'll bring that up later. But that got me going into your TED Talks and looking a bit, at your career. You seem like you have this really nice balance of an illustrious academic career, but also somebody who's got the persona and personality to be out front talking to media and stuff like that. It's kind of a rare mix, I find, in the scientists. So, but I'd love to hear about, how do you tell people about your work? What do you say you do? And give us a little, synopsis of your background and your academic training.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and it's great to have you guys here. I grew up fascinated by fish, and like many young people, sharks in particular. And I guess the best way to describe it is I never really outgrew that fascination.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually raised in suburban Connecticut, just outside of New York City. Grew up on Long Island Sound, and didn't have a lot of exposure to the ocean except through some of the early television shows that were around in the 70s. The undersea world of Jacques Cousteau, movies like Jaws, The Deep, TV shows like Flipper, Sea Hunt.
We've got the nature faker stuff.
Yeah, and I said, this is really, really cool. And I decided, wow, I want to be in the ocean. I want to be around the ocean. I want to do cool things with fish, and specifically sharks. And so I went to school, University of Rhode Island, got a couple of degrees, volunteered at a couple of labs, was picked up as a technician, and ultimately got to chase my childhood dream of studying sharks.
Yeah.
And so it's been really fun. I mean, first and foremost, I like to describe myself as a research scientist, but I'm finding, because of the charismatic nature of the fish that I work with, and the fact that the media and the public in general is ravenous for information.
Yeah.
Much more, I think, than people think. I mean, they really do want to know more about the ocean, about these animals. And so I really do love to interact with the public and through various media outlets, educate the public about what we're doing and what we're learning.
You are most well known for your work with white sharks, though. Is that correct? And just to get this out of the way in the beginning, this thing, great white sharks, is that anything? Is that just simply the public it's a common name that people have come to use?
Yeah, I mean, great white shark is kind of it's a common name used by everybody historically, but scientists have kind of dropped
It's a little redundant.
the great part of it. Because maybe there's some not so great white sharks, but it's the same species.
There's no other white shark that we're talking about.
No.
So growing up, you mentioned Jaws. I've heard you talk before about some inspiration that you got out of that. You want to share any of that?
Yeah, I mean, so I was in my early teens, and this movie came out, and I saw it in a movie theater.
Yeah.
And in those days, going to the movie theater was really an amazing thing. And to see that film on a big screen, I was absolutely amazed by the big fish in it, by all the characters, but in particular, I thought the marine scientist Matt Hooper had the coolest job on Earth. And I said, geez, wouldn't it be great if someday I could be just like him? And
you literally are him now, though. You are like actually really, I don't mean literally like the millennials say it. I mean like literally you are that playing that role in our culture right now.
Yeah, I guess I am, certainly.
You guess. I mean, how many people run around on the pulpit of boats harpooning great white sharks with tags? I mean, I've never even seen anything like this,
No, I guess you're right. Yeah. People do describe me as the modern day Matt Hooper. And it's really fun, and I get the feeling that it's watching him on the screen decades ago. It does feel like being out there now and experiencing it is just riveting.
It's neat just because you think about how many tens of thousands of kids watched and said, "I want to do that," and then it's you. You're the one who filtered to the top of that pack, and that's just really neat to me. So you obviously got a lot of passion for it. We were just watching a video of you that I'm sure gets brought up all the time, but for the listener, there's a video of you out on the pulpit of that boat, and that shark comes right up underneath, throws himself out of the water, and looks like he goes to take your feet, except that you're standing on that metal pulpit. What can you?
He tried to get you, huh?
What's going on?
Well, yeah,
what a scene.
The whole experience was, on the order of a second or two. Yeah. Really, if you look at that in real time, that shark comes up. I'm looking down, and I don't see it till suddenly there's this open mouth, and I literally look down the throat of a great white shark coming up out of the water at me. And then as I watched, so I was kind of like, wow, did anyone else see that? And I actually think I say that in the video. And people were like, what the hell was that? And then as I watched it over and over again, that's when the fear, I think, started to come to me and say, wait a minute, I think that shark was going for me.
Yeah, and it's like, nobody tell my wife about this.
Yeah, well, she saw it so many times.
I'm sure.
That video got around. But clearly the shark had interpreted an image of me at the surface, because you got to put yourself in the position of that shark, the really poor visibility of the water that it was swimming in. I couldn't even see that shark swimming.
Okay.
Normally I can. And so I was just looking down, and out of nowhere came this thing. And so that shark had to be in real, what I call hunting mode, where that shark wants to attack and kill a seal.
And he's seen your silhouette.
And then my silhouette, my image, a flash, who knows what it was.
Yeah.
That shark reacted instantaneously. And I think what scares me more about that video than actually being on that pulpit is, what if I was somebody coming off the beach and going to surf or swim or do some kind of recreate? Would that person potentially have been bitten?
Right.
Because that shark was so hyped up and in feeding mode.
Yeah.
Where it was clearly making a mistake going for me. And if I was right at the water's surface or in the water, would I have been strong?
Yeah. I mean, if that pulpit wasn't there, it looks like you would have not have any feet today.
I got to tell you, I don't go out on the pulpit as much as I used to. I mean, if I don't see the shark.
Okay. So backing up a little bit, your job, I mean, I assume you have a lot of desk work that you got to do and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure you're writing a lot and doing a lot of media. But your busy season when you're out on the water, what is it? Tell us about the work you're doing and what your sort of, a day at the office is like.
Yeah, I mean, I always describe myself as a classically trained fisheries biologist, and that's because the work that we're trying to do is to generate information that will allow for natural resource management. That's what we do. That's what my agency does. We want to be able to manage fish populations, including white sharks, at sustainable levels. And so we're collecting the kinds of data that will allow us to do that. So whether you're hunting deer or catching fish, the rules and regs that we put in place for those activities are based on, hopefully, scientific data that are being collected by individuals like me. Yeah. And so when we're going out on the water, we've got very specific objectives in mind. But I have to say the objectives that we had early on with white sharks have kind of morphed and changed, because we're dealing with an animal that is potentially dangerous to humans. And as a result, instead of just studying life history information or population size or broad-scale migration patterns, we've kind of changed and shifted to studying really fine-scale predator-prey behavior.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so what we're interested in knowing is where, when, and how are white sharks most likely to attack their natural prey? And what kind of information or what kind of patterns can we find in those data that we're collecting that will allow us to inform the general public as to where, when, and how they can avoid being bitten by white sharks?
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, so are you an ichthyologist by trade, or is there a finer level of resolution type? Is there another word for people who work specifically with sharks?
No, actually, I'm a fish biologist. I consider myself a marine biologist.
Okay.
In some context, I'm an ichthyologist as well, because I do study fish. But, and I'm a behavioral ecologist.
Okay.
I'm a physiologist.
Right,
I've done
right.
a bunch of physiology and movement ecologist. I mean, so,
Okay.
there's a whole kinds of terms.
Okay.
It's like the term medical doctor.
Right.
There's all these disciplines
Sure.
within it.
Okay. But there isn't like a name for shark biologists.
No, there hasn't been one
Interesting.
contrived yet.
It's
but-
almost like if I'm surprised. It seems like the people who name things in Latin abhor a vacuum or something. So there's always something. So I'm surprised to hear that. But how is this part, I guess the Gulf of Maine, because I imagine you have colleagues around the world who are working with white sharks. How have things been changing here? Because it seems like if I understand it correctly, there's more and more white shark activity in the Gulf of Maine, which I assume has a lot to do with the huge number of seals that I'm seeing when I'm out.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dan. What we're seeing in the Gulf of Maine is what some would term as, and I agree with this, the natural restoration of an ecosystem.
So back to historical norms, in your opinion.
Based on all the available historical information we have, it looks like with the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, we have now allowed seal populations representing multiple seal species to rebound and recolonize areas where they previously existed.
Okay.
So there are some long-term data sets, granted they're not ideal, that do indicate that these seals were quite abundant all the way from basically Long Island all the way to Canada.
Okay.
Hundreds of years ago.
Species specifically, because we have how many here in the Gulf?
Well, I believe we have 4 species of seals. And now I'm not a seal biologist.
Right.
The one that I specifically focus on is the gray seal.
Okay, and that's
which is
who
incredibly
white sharks
abundant.
like to eat?
Yeah, they will
Whites
eat the
eat
gray
grays.
seal. I think they target them off Massachusetts. But another very, very common seal is the harbor seal. You'll see it all throughout the Gulf of Maine. There's the further north you get, there's the hooded seal as well. There's the ring seal in the
seal,
Arctic. And there's probably a couple of
Will
others.
the white sharks eat all of these, or do they just preferentially take the grays, or will they eat any of these?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with seasonal overlap.
Yeah.
Because the seals are not necessarily driven by season as much as the sharks are.
Yeah.
The seals are mammals that will stay in areas for long periods of time. So you will find gray seals literally year-round off Cape Cod, as well as in the Gulf of Maine. But white sharks, their movements are driven by temperature, and they exhibit seasonal changes in abundance. So if the white shark overlaps with a population of seals, whether it's harbors and primarily grays, they will indeed attack and kill them.
Okay.
Perhaps when they move up into Canadian waters, they can encounter those other seal species.
Got it, yeah.
But then you get into this predator-prey relationship where the shark has to figure out how to effectively kill that seal. The gray seal is a large target. And so
How big do they get?
They get about 800 pounds.
That's a lot of
So
animal
that's
right there.
That's a lot of meat. That's a lot of blubber.
Well, I mean, that's like bigger than... That's the high range of what black bears can achieve up here in this part of the country. I mean, you think about that, but in the water, I mean, it's
amazing. And when you see these large adult male seals, those bulls, they're not elephant seals, but they're big, and you're not used to seeing that around the waters of New England.
Right.
But this perception that this is a new phenomenon is actually not true, or likely not true. The seals are coming back after literally hundreds of years of overexploitation.
Okay, no. Do you remember the name, Grant, of the biologist we worked with who talked about eating down the food chain? We called his episode that. Do you remember?
That was Bob Stenick?
Bob Stenick, big in the lobster fishery in Maine, and he gave us this sort of phrase, eating down the food chain, and he was saying, we came in here, we took the whales out, and then we took the cod out, and then, we're down to taking seaweed and spiny dogfish now, right? We got everything
exactly
is like,
right.
And so historically, the seals would have been here, the whales would have been here, the cod would have been here, and the cod would have been inshore in a way that we don't really see today. And you think the white sharks would have been here too. That part's really interesting to me. Now, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, we have friends up in Newfoundland, and they have a seal fishery, or a seal hunt, and they're struggling with the Marine Mammal Protection Act because they can't export any of their seal skins into the United States, which would be the primary market for them. So they get real frustrated with the Marine Mammal Protection Act. At the same time, what happened to marine mammals is just, pretty shocking when you read about the numbers of animals that were taken. At this point where we're at, how do you feel about that act, and is it good what's happened in your mind, from your perspective, and hopefully your bias towards white sharks, of course? Are we in a good place with this amount of seals? You talk to the fishermen, and it's, the seals are eating all the fish, and they're friggin' seals. And I used to lifeguard in a Gunkwit and in Wells, and it was pretty routine to have a buckshot, killed seal roll up on shore. You'd see, they'd shoot them out there. I guess I don't really, there's a question in there if you can pick it out for me. Where are we at with all this, and is it time to revisit this stuff, or is it working?
Well, I think it's a great question. I hear it a lot. Because I'm a fisheries biologist, I believe in the sustainable harvest of animals, marine animals. And so I'm not opposed to having the discussion with regard to any species where there might be a market demand. So whether we're talking about, white sharks or codfish, striped bass, or even seals, I think those conversations need to be had.
Because if I could get a tag, like if it was like a lottery, I get a seal tag every 10 years.
Amazing.
I'd definitely take one. Rendered seal fat.
Yeah, I kind of wonder. So it's interesting to hear about. So the Canadians are struggling with this. Obviously, the U.S. fishermen, which I talk to all the time, are struggling with it. Surfers, beachgoers, people who want to swim, attribute the presence of the sharks rightfully to the seals, and they have concerns about it. If you live on the water and you have a nice big beach and there's a pile of seals on them that smell, you have concerns about it.
Okay.
So that's one end of the spectrum, and then you have the folks who are at the other end who believe that, this natural ecosystem will sort itself out, and there's some merit to that thinking. And then you have people who kind of in the middle who want to talk about these things and figure out the best way forward.
Right.
And I agree with. I absolutely understand the perspectives of all the players here. I think when it comes to controlling seal populations, I'm a little concerned with where we would need to go in order to make people happy that want to control populations.
Right.
Now, I think even the harvest in Canada is a relatively small harvest. And if we're talking about a Northwest Atlantic population and of just gray seals being somewhere around 500,000 animals, to go back to the days where they weren't messing with your gear or eating your cod, you would have to take a lot. Remove a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't think the American public has the palate for that.
Right.
And how it would be exploited. You'd have to remove tens of thousands of animals.
Yeah.
When there's currently not
marine mammals too, which have that. There's so much human empathy for them.
Right.
Of course.
Deer hunters have to put up with this all the time, right? And to see what would happen with the removal of mammals where you don't even have an active market.
Okay. Right.
Now either. If there was some demand for it, seal skin, seal meat, seal blubber, who knows? Then I think the public would swallow that pill a little easier.
But we're nowhere near there is kind of what you're saying. And and do you use the terms, like when we're talking about, we've done a lot of shows about the bear biology in Maine and New Hampshire where we hunt, and I think we're at 40 7,000 black bears in Maine right now, which is interesting. Just in contrast to, say, polar bears, there's not even that many polar bears in the world. I mean, it's just amazing how many black bears we have. Yet the landscape could support more, but the social carrying capacity is exceeded. Is the same language used? Like, is there a social, like, I would imagine the Gulf of Maine can easily support these white sharks, but also the public, like you said, starting to get nervous about it. So is that kind of like one of the things you're dealing with? And it's not like anybody's removing white sharks from the system, right?
That's right. I mean, the only mortality we're seeing with white sharks, because it is a prohibited species from retention. In other words, fishermen cannot keep them.
They do hook into them.
They
from
do
time
hook
to time.
into them, absolutely, and they get them as bycatch. In some of the fisheries here in New England, gill nets in particular,
Really?
will capture and wrap up and kill white sharks. Wow. So there's some level of cryptic bycatch mortality going on. We don't know what those numbers look like. We don't know whether it's high enough to threaten the population. We do know, and we're working on a study now, we're hoping to complete this in the next year, where we'll have an estimate, just like your black bears, we'll have an estimate
it's got to be hard
for
to
what
do.
what that population size looks like in New England and what its trajectory is. Wow. But I think we're just beginning to have those discussions in the context of what from a social perspective, the American public in New England is willing to tolerate relative to white sharks. It's kind of funny because on the West Coast, California has kind of been dealing with this for a couple of decades. And they seem to be, kind of chilled out with regard to the presence of white sharks and the fact that somebody...
They're more chilled out in general out there, though, right?
Yeah, they are. And but, every other year somebody is killed by a white shark, and people kind of just say, oh, well, that happened. I think when you talk about New England, it's particularly the coast of Maine, just last summer. It's a shocker. And it should be.
And we don't have grizzlies here, or brown bears. We don't have pumas anymore here. We don't have wolves here anymore. We've, all of that predator eradication starts out here, and we've been living in such a curated, safe, kind of artificial ecotone for so long. Whereas in the West, right, they have all these predators on the lands, because it's also mountain lions take people from time to time, and brown bears take people from time to time. So I think it's like it's more enculturated there.
It is.
You got to look over your shoulder. And I hear it the most from people who abalone dive, because they're down in those. They say they're down in there, and I think is it sea lions there as well in the kelp forests, and you're popping around in your wetsuit, and all of a sudden face to face with a shark.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I admire them. They harvest those abalone in prime white shark habitat. There have been abalone divers killed historically. But that's a group that they weigh the risk to the benefit.
I think it's part of the reward for them is the risk, I bet.
Maybe it is, and I see surfers on the water with white sharks swimming around them on Cape Cod when we're out there, and clearly those folks are willing to take the risk. They look at the probability of being bitten by one as being an extremely low probability event,
which it is, right?
And they say, okay, it's worth it for me to go ride a wave and take the chance. And that's fine.
It's got to be more dangerous driving the I-95 and take that risk all the time.
Statistically,
right?
It is. People ask me, and you've probably heard this, is, hey, I'm going to the beach on Cape Cod, Greg. What do I do? And I said, drive safely.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Put on sunblock.
Yeah,
it's funny.
You're more likely to be hurt by, in a car accident, or even drowning. Riptides.
I'm really glad I've noticed this trend. If you talk to somebody in brown bears, you talk to somebody on mountain lions, scientists, but they often don't want to talk about this aspect of, they want to downplay it. I understand why, of course, but it's like, hey, this is science. Like, it's a statistically relevant thing, and I want to be able to talk about it. So I'd like to circle back at some point, but man, I want to learn some stuff about sharks, and I'm wondering if we can maybe start with some of the evolutionary biology and just get a little sense of who these animals are and maybe who they descend from, and how do we even know? Like, it's not like, I imagine the archaeology is challenging. So I'm curious, like, where do sharks begin? How far back do they go? How old are they? And what's the relationship of white sharks today to some of the ancestral species?
Yeah, it's a remarkable group of fishes, and and they are fish. White sharks are just a different kind of fish. They're a cartilaginous fish. They have their own unique class of fishes, and we generally divide the fishes into two major groups that have evolved over time: the bony fishes, the teleosts, and then the cartilaginous fishes, which include the sharks, which are the chondrichthyans. But they date back over 400 million years, and it's a remarkably, successful group because they have persisted while other major animal groups, including the dinosaurs, have come and gone.
Come and gone, yeah.
So they've been around that long.
Wow. Also, correct me if I'm wrong here in my perception of it. I sometimes think back to, you look at like 10,000, 15,000 years ago, just here, the animals that were here that were lost in the Pleistocene extinction are almost otherworldly sometimes. Sharks seem to have been in this form for a very long time, right? Changing size and some small changes, but they've looked this way for how long?
That's exactly right. It's a good point. It really does illustrate how successfully they are, for lack of a better word, designed or have evolved or adapted to their environment. Wow. And they have very unique attributes to them, with ranging from unique sensory systems like electrosensory perception to unique reproductive systems, which are more mammalian-like.
Live birth, right?
Live birth for many species, low numbers of young at big sizes, which increases survivability, but renders them very vulnerable to exploitation.
Okay, so lower fecundity, like more like an elephant or something.
Exactly.
Than like a big litter of pups.
Exactly. So a short-fin mako shark, for example, or even a great white shark would have only maybe a dozen to 24 young max. It may be
in its life.
every other year, perhaps, maybe even every third year. We haven't sorted that out.
Right.
And growth or gestation within the female could be as long as a year and a half to 2 years.
Is it true that pups will eat each other in the womb?
For some species, the sand tiger in particular is a species that will consume its brothers and sisters.
In the womb?
In the womb. And that's
savage.
Amazing.
So
right?
it will only give birth to 2 young, one from each uterus, because sharks have 2 uteri.
Wow.
So, really unique, life history attributes that have allowed it to succeed with very little modification over the course of millions of years. And now the species we see here today have been around for, some of them, over 100 million years.
That are still extant species?
Absolutely. And the white sharks certainly over 20, 30 million years.
Really?
And so these are animals that are highly derived and very successful and have persisted over great periods of time.
That's amazing.
And they come and they go.
Of course.
The great megalodon, of course, did not persist.
Related to the great white?
Thought to be in the same lineage, but actually now I guess the most recent arguments are that it was in a separate lineage from the same root of the tree. So it's closely related, but they went off on their own.
Okay.
As opposed to the white shark actually coming from the megalodon.
But they were overlapping. They were at the same time, both present.
I'll have to double check that to be honest with you, and because I simply don't study shark evolution, and I don't keep up with it. More likely, and it's changing dramatically all the time because sharks don't fossilize as well as
they don't have bones.
They don't have bones, and so much of what we know.
Are their teeth osseous and enameled, though?
Yeah, the teeth are what persist the longest. And so much of what we know about shark lineage is based on teeth.
Because do we have anything more? I mean, again, I know it's not your specialty, but megalodon, I only see teeth. I don't see.
That's exactly right.
That's all we have.
So
you got to build the whole story off the teeth.
Most of these stories you're building off teeth. There'll be the occasional impressions in some stone, but not much.
Okay.
Like some of the earliest shark species had really funky shapes, and those have preserved well in some of the fossil record in terms of imprint fossilization.
Yeah. Wow.
But so it's fascinating, these animals and their attributes and how it benefited them over the course of evolution, but now is to their detriment as they face high levels of exploitation in parts of the world.
Okay.
So that slow growth rate,
Right.
that low number of young, it's reminiscent of whales.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of damage to whales
Right.
very quickly, in the 1800s. And
Where are we at in relationship? Like right now, I'd like to talk about some of that exploitation. I don't want to get too far down that road, but is this like the shark finning and things like that are going on? Is that what we're talking about, or is there more than that too?
Well, I think people tend to focus on shark finning, which is the practice of catching a shark, cutting its fins off and discarding it.
Oh, it's so hard to hear that.
That does happen, but not as much as people think. It's actually a lot of countries are harvesting shark for protein.
Okay.
And the fins are indeed being shipped to Asian markets because the prices are excellent. But the meat is also used locally.
They're using those animals, yeah.
And I feel better about that.
Yeah, of course.
But some of these harvest levels, particularly in developing countries, are too high and not sustainable.
Okay.
Here in the U.S., we have done a very good job on a relative scale of managing shark populations to the extent of most of them are coming back.
Okay.
But not all of them are there yet.
Right. Okay, well, that leads me to want to zoom in a layer on white sharks specifically and their life history. And in particular, are they pretty cosmopolitan? I mean, what is their range? Because we can do a lot here, but obviously if these animals are traveling around the globe, then they're going to run into places that are less hospitable to them too. So, tell us about the life history of a white shark.
Well, sure, yeah. So the white shark is, and much of this we don't know yet, which
That's
is
cool.
And we don't know it on a global scale.
Okay.
So it's not just that we don't understand it in the Atlantic Ocean, but where they've been studying white sharks in the Pacific Ocean for literally decades, we still haven't quite pinpointed where, for example, males are more likely to be mating with females, where females give birth to their young. How long is the gestation period?
We don't know.
Is it 12 months? Is it 24 months? We think it's somewhere in that range. Is it 2 young or 14 young? We know it'll get up to 14 young. Is it more than that? Some of these really basic
in a single
questions,
event or in a
single event.
No kidding.
We got a sense that they're born somewhere around 4 feet long. But in terms of where, when, and how that happens,
No one's witnessed it?
nobody's witnessed it. And
Really?
it's like the holy grail of white shark research.
Sure.
That everyone's reaching for on a global scale. Where are these animals born? How long is that gestation period? Where are males mating with females? All those are big questions that remain. We all have hypotheses, and we can all throw something and hope it sticks against the wall. But, the honest scientist will tell you, well, we really don't know that. Scientists don't like to say that too often.
Yeah.
But here in the Atlantic, white sharks are pretty much restricted to the east coast of the United States and Canada down into the Gulf of Mexico, sometimes penetrating the Caribbean.
The water's too warm down there?
Yeah, they typically do not like to be in that super hot water. The ideal, I think, temperature range for white sharks tends to be more on the temperate scale. What we see here in New England in the summertime, anywhere between, 50 degrees, 68, 67, somewhere in there. That's kind of their sweet spot. They will go into warmer water. They don't like to stay there. They will go into colder water. They don't like to stay there. They like to be in their comfort zone, even though they will penetrate the extremes. And so they're seasonal migrants here to the Gulf of Maine, all the way to Canada, primarily in the summer, staying into the mid to late fall. Generally, most of the white sharks are gone by the end of November. Some will persist into December. Depends what kind of winter we have, because their movements are driven by temperature, water temperature. And then most of them will head down south and overwinter off the southeastern United States. And as I said, some will go into the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
What's really fascinating is some segment, and it generally involves the larger animals, what we call subadults, all in excess of 3 meters long. Some of them will wander out into the open Atlantic during the winter months. And when they're out there, they'll go as far east as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and even cross into the eastern Atlantic. And one of our sharks passed within 30 miles of the Azores.
Wow.
So that's a real broad movement to the east. And when they're out in this open Atlantic, they will dive to depths as great as 1,000 meters, 3,000 feet, every day.
Wow.
And so that baffles the hell
We don't
out
know
of us.
why.
We have no
Do they
idea.
eat anything besides seals? Do they eat pelagic fish and things like that?
Well, some of the work we've done and others have done clearly indicates that seals are a great part of their diet, but not exclusively what they feed on. As a matter of fact, most of the rest of the year, they're targeting a number of other species of fish.
Oh, okay.
And they'll also eat dolphins and porpoises, and they love to scavenge whale carcasses.
Okay.
Yeah, whale carcass provides
That are
them
down at the bottom on the floor?
not only on the bottom, but floating at the surface, and we've seen that plenty of times in the Gulf of Maine.
They're after calorically dense fat deposits, right?
Exactly.
So I would imagine, a tuna would be a fat, would that be a fish source? And then obviously whales have that thick blubber layer, so they're just... Is it true that when they bite, like you always hear people say they bite into a person and they go like, nope, that's not it, based on the composition? Is there any truth to that? Like, do they have mouthfeel for fat in some way? Or?
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget they have taste buds too.
Yeah.
Right? So, they are focused on very specific prey.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that texture and taste play a role in whether or not a shark,
They're like,
any shark.
antibiotics and Axe cologne, not for me.
Sunscreen.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Santa
Tropicana.
colada.
And so they will release a victim most of the time, almost all the time, actually. And the texture just doesn't seem right. Maybe it's the taste isn't right, regardless. But usually the damage is extensive.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, they are. So they're seasonal migrants. They have this offshore pelagic aspect to their life, which we don't understand. They do the same thing in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, where some of them, well, on the west coast of the U.S., almost virtually all of the large sharks will move out into the a part of the Pacific Ocean we call the White Shark Cafe. And there's a lot of discussion as to what they're doing out there. In the Atlantic, they tend to be more nomadic wanderers.
Do we know this from tagging them?
Yeah.
Okay, so do we know yet if these populations mingle, and will a shark cross an ocean, and do you think that these populations are mingling?
Well, right now, based on what we've done and what other scientists have done in other oceans, we know that there's mingling between, say, California white sharks and Mexican white sharks, not only to a limited extent north-south, but also when they move out into the open ocean to this very specific area. So, but they don't cross the ocean. In the Atlantic, we've had them go out into the open Atlantic, but not go all the way to the eastern side and the Mediterranean or eastern Atlantic, Europe. So they seem to be endemic to the western side of the Atlantic. However, white sharks that have been tagged off South Africa, one of them in particular, this was written up in a paper many years ago, went to Australia and back.
Oh, wow.
And so that's our first real trans and interoceanic movement that we've ever seen with this species. So it likely happens, certainly not very often because of all the tags that have been put out there. We haven't seen it more than once.
And they're genetically, we haven't looked for the gene flow or anything?
There is definitely, has been a lot of molecular work done with genetics on white sharks. And that also proves that they're very ocean distinct populations.
Yeah. Wow, man, this is really interesting
I never
stuff.
knew there was such a mysterious animal.
Yeah, give us some fun facts. So you must have a list of some there, because there must be, like you said, about their physiology in particular, some really interesting things.
There's a lot of cool stuff. I mean, I mentioned the deep diving behavior.
Yeah.
Before we started using, we meaning the scientific community, started using these highly sophisticated satellite-based tags, we never had any idea that a lot of species of sharks, not just white sharks, move out into these open oceanic habitats and dive down to such great depths because it doesn't make any sense to us.
What do people think? What are some theories?
Well, there's two driving, hypotheses. One is that you're doing it, to reproduce, or you're doing it to feed. I happen to favor the idea of going out there and wandering around the open Atlantic to feed. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to leave a really good, restaurant like Cape Cod where there's big boys and big girls all hanging out feeding, to go out to the open Atlantic and reproduce.
Right.
I would imagine you're going to do it when you're all hanging out in the same spot.
Yeah, and you want to.
But in the Pacific, there are scientists who believe that they are going out to the open Pacific to mate. So that's, there's some merit to that as well, even though I think that the feeding behavior is far driving that far more.
Yeah.
But other exciting things about white sharks that we've learned over the years is that they're really long-lived. Most people don't realize it, but we've aged white sharks to be over 70 years old. And that's a long time.
How otoliths or something?
No, we use vertebrae in white sharks in general.
They don't have an otolith because they're not a bony fish.
That's right. They don't have an otolith. They don't have scales, which are really commonly used, as you know, to age bony fishes. And so what we have to rely on is rings in the vertebrae of the sharks. But one of the papers we wrote just a couple of years ago indicates that maybe the rings that you count in the vertebrae, like you would count on a tree, aren't necessarily indicative of age.
Yeah.
And so all these studies have been done for the last 75 years. Counting rings on vertebrae might be off in terms of estimating growth.
Massively off or just not quite accurate?
It could be off by quite a bit. I mean, the oldest shark that we aged with vertebrae was just over 40 years old. But based on the fact that another technique we use is bomb carbon within the vertebrae if the shark was alive during the period when there was a lot of nuclear testing.
Wow.
So it actually provides...
It'll incorporate some of that.
It incorporates that very unique carbon isotope into the vertebrae of the shark. So it, in essence, marks it.
Yeah.
And so if you count the rings after that mark, or you compare the amount of carbon over time since that mark, you can come up with an age estimate. And we did that, and it turns out that those 40-year-old sharks are actually in their 70s.
Wow.
And so at some point, the rings stop getting laid down because the sharks really basically stops growing as much.
Yeah.
It's kind of like us. We tend to stop growing in height and then maybe grow in girth.
Right.
And that's exactly what happens with a lot of fish species.
Yeah, because you see some of the whites that are just so like a football shape, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah,
absolutely amazing.
This electrosensing that they do, and is there any? I'm starting to see wetsuits for free divers that have like some kind of electromagnetic blocking thing. Is there anything to something like that? Is this pure marketing? And how does the system work? And what can they actually sense and detect?
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, if you like the WildFed podcast, you're going to love the WildFed TV show. And we're proud to be airing each Monday at 7 p.m. East and 11 p.m. East on the Outdoor Channel. Season 1 of the WildFed TV show is 10 episodes, and this week Outdoor Channel is airing episode 2, which features a wild turkey hunt and foraging for ostrich fern fiddleheads and wild leeks. If you're like me and don't have cable, you can use friendlytv.com. That's FRNDLY TV.com. It's like the word friendly without any vowels. FRNDLYTV.com. It's less than $7 a month, and it gives you access to Outdoor Channel shows as they air, as well as some other networks too. And for our Canadian friends, you can see us on the Sportsman's Channel Canada Tuesdays at 8 p.m. East. I'll also be hosting some social media live streams for Outdoor Channel as shows start airing, so be sure to follow us on WildFed's social media or subscribe to our twice-a-month newsletter, The Subsistence, to be notified about those. Thanks again for all your incredible support in 2020, and we hope you'll be watching the WildFed TV show on the Outdoor Channel in 2021. Now, back to the show.
Well, yeah, there's been a number of companies and new technologies that have been put forth to try to deter shark bites, and I think it's great, and the new technologies, may or may not work. We really haven't seen the hardcore empirical studies,
right.
And because they're hard to do.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. So, a
lot of anecdote. I survived. It works.
You don't want to put a person out there, one person wearing this wetsuit and one person not, and
see who gets bit.
And then you stuff them with bait. And no one's going to do that. So you do that with empty wetsuits, and you're still providing some incentive for the animal to bite because they don't naturally feed on us. So getting that unnatural event to occur is very, very difficult. So there are various kinds of tools that people have developed or devices that emit electrical fields. And the idea being that, you would overwhelm the shark's
Confuse their senses.
electrosensory perception.
Like a bright light in your eyes.
Exactly. Where you make it uncomfortable for the shark. And, there's some evidence that it might work. Earth magnets on fishing gear might keep the shark from biting the bait, Yeah. And so all this new technology is being tested. There's some promising results out there. Surfboards are surfers are mounting electro devices on the bottoms of their surfboards and paying $7,000 to do that. And, and it gives them peace of mind, perhaps.
Yeah.
It also gives them a mild shock, by the way.
Salt water's a pretty good conductor, huh?
And they may never get bitten, so for them it works, and that's fine, But the laws of probability may say they're never going to get bitten anyway.
Right.
But the electrosensory perception is really quite unique and fascinating among sharks because they use it. And we tend to think of it as being, wow, they can sense electricity a mile away. It's not. It's very what we call a near field sense. Yeah. It's at that moment when, let's say, a white shark gets within 1 or 2 meters of its prey, and it wants to protect its eyes and roll them back. And so it's going to rely on that electrosensory perception to actually close
their
the
eyes
deal.
are their weakness.
Yeah,
so they're going to roll those back,
eyes,
and they need to be able to figure out proprioceptively where that fish is, or where that mammal is.
Yeah,
that's neat.
Or if it's a shark that's normally feeds on the bottom and might feed on let's say stingrays that are resting on the bottom, are very well adapted to it.
Camouflaging and stuff.
Coming over that stingray and being able to sense the electricity it's generating will allow you to target that prey without ever seeing it.
Wow. That's really cool.
Great hammerheads are known to do that.
Okay. What's up with this breaching behavior? We were, again, just in preparation of talking to you, watching some video. I mean, it's just breathtaking. It's terrifying, breathtaking, awe-inspiring. It's so many emotions when you see a fish that big come out and knock a big marine mammal into the air or scoop it up. I mean, do other sharks exhibit this behavior? Is this a white shark thing?
It's primarily a white shark thing. I mean, there are other sharks that breach. But the white shark's doing it during a predatory strike, and it really goes back to this predator-prey strategy that we're trying to study here in Cape Cod, but other scientists have been studying it elsewhere around the world. The white shark is a remarkably adaptable animal. You could take the very same species, put it in 3 different oceans in multiple habitats, and have it successfully feed on marine mammals in those habitats, even though they're dramatically different.
Yeah.
So if you compare, white sharks off Guadalupe Island in Mexico, which is deep, clear, crystal clear water, feeding on seals, versus Cape Cod, which is shallow, turbid, ugly water with sandbar systems, and both of them successfully doing it, it really is a testament to its unique ability.
What did you say, 30 million years or something they've been adapting to a rapidly changing environment that's the planet's always changing, so...
That's right. And so when they're attacking seals in South Africa, which is where you see this breaching behavior, what they're actually doing is they're pinning the seal to a barrier, and the barrier being the water's surface.
Wow.
So they're hanging out deep. The seals are got to get from point A to offshore. Point A being a little island they're hanging out on where they're comfortable and safe, but they have to feed. So they have to run the gauntlet. To do that, they do it quickly. And they're leaving the shoreline. And the sharks, in essence, are coming up from great depth, and they have to strike with speed and stealth.
Yeah.
So they're using the silhouette of that seal against the surface, and they're using the surface to its advantage because the seal can't go too far up.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
It can only come down, and going down is not a good place to be for the seal. So it's got to shoot, and so it comes straight from below and use such speed to pin it that its momentum carries it out of the water.
So it overshoots it.
It overshoots it, drives it out of the water. Sometimes it gets it, sometimes it doesn't.
Fully clearing the water in some cases, right?
Fully clearing the water.
Has anybody calculated the caloric expenditures? Must be huge. I mean, I know fat is 9 calories a gram, so it's, I'm sure it pays off, but you watching it, thinking of what it would take to get that animal's body out of the water.
Yeah, I think a number of scientists have attempted to do the physics,
Yeah.
in terms of what speed would be necessary, and I think somewhere between 25 and 30 miles an hour would be required,
okay.
and the force that is needed to generate that, and then and of course, like you said, it's got to be worth it from an energetic point of view, and it is, it's. To travel great distances, like let's say move from the Gulf of Mexico to Cape Cod to target seals, means that there's a benefit to that.
Yeah.
You're going to blow all this energy swimming a really long distance, opportunistically feeding probably along the way, but knowing very well that that restaurant you're going to is going to be a massive energetic payoff
big feed.
if you can figure out how to eat them.
So just for clarity, that behavior is something we'd see in South Africa, but not something we're going to see in the Western Atlantic.
Typically not.
Typically not.
Yeah, but we're starting. I mean, we've seen some breaching behavior, with me being the victim of one of those breaches. We've also seen.
Where was that? That was right here.
That was right here off of Cape Cod.
I mean, he came right out of the water.
That shark came up to an extent. Now,
how far out of the water do you think? 6 feet? 8?
Probably only about, because I'm only about 4.5 feet off the water myself.
Okay.
So that shark only came up about 2 to 3 feet out of the water.
Yeah.
But we have seen them breach fully out of the water.
Okay.
There, it's somewhat rare, because they don't have the same environmental conditions they do in South Africa, and the seals behave differently. They're different species seals. Each seal has its own behavioral pattern, and you've got this great dance of predator versus prey. The prey doesn't want to get eaten.
Right.
And so the prey, which is a fairly intelligent, highly mobile animal, the seal, is going to try to outsmart the shark. And the shark, which is not quite as intelligent, not even as mobile as the seal,
right.
It's got to figure out how to kill the seal.
Yeah. I was going to ask about the intelligence, because when you look into, it's like if I look into the eyes of your dog here, it's like, I see somebody looking back at me, and I find that with the marine mammals, whales for sure, or sea lions or seals. I mean, the seals come to interact with us when we're out fishing. I mean, you see it all the time.
Yeah.
When you look in the eyes of a shark, which I haven't done a lot of, and I'm sure you've done a lot more of, man, there's something quite frighteningly vacant about the look that they have. But maybe from experience you could speak to that. And do we know anything about shark intelligence?
Well, we do know that much of the brain, the shark has a large brain. Particularly sharks in general as a group have a proportionately large brain.
Oh, neat.
Similar to some of the lower mammals or even birds, where if you plot the size of the brain relative to the body size, they fall above most other fishes and lower vertebrates. And so on a grand scheme of things, that would give you a sense that maybe they're big thinkers. But when you really start to take apart the brain and say, okay, what does each part of it do? You realize that much of it, if not all of it's committed to sensory perception. You've got big nasal cavity, you've got eyesight, you've got electrosensory perception, you've got taste. So you've got all these sensory organs, and there's very specific parts of that big brain that are dedicated to that.
Yeah.
Because these are large ocean wanderers that have to go great distances and sometimes in a very deserted environment to find a food source.
Right.
And so, and to find a mate, because inherently shark populations are lower than other groups of animals. And so they've got to find, each other. And so much of the brain is dedicated to sensory perception. And of course, just making the mechanics of the animal work, which is a very complex physiological system.
Right.
Now, having said that, there have been sharks that are trained to do very simple things in captivity. For those you can keep it, I'm not saying white sharks,
right?
But white sharks will also learn. I mean, it's very apparent. A white shark isn't born with the inherent ability to successfully find, attack, and kill a seal, for example. There's a bit of a learning curve to it. You may know how to find it. You may know that steak smells really good, but now how do you actually attack and kill this animal in a very unique environment? And so there is a learning curve to that. And they know to come back to the very same restaurant each year.
Yeah.
They have these very distinct migratory patterns. We see individuals sometimes arrive to the very same day, back in Cape Cod,
cool. No
after
kidding.
traveling thousands of miles.
How do you know an individual? Because I imagine when you put one of these tags on, they're pretty temporary. Like how long does the tag stay on, and then how are you able, by coloration patterns and things like that, able to identify individuals?
Yeah, there's a number of methods. Obviously, tagging them will tell us who that shark is. We have tags that will last, hopefully, for a decade.
Non-transmitting tags, or
No, that's actually a transmitting acoustic tag.
okay,
Yeah.
they need to be at the surface.
No, that one actually is detected by an array of acoustic receivers.
Oh yeah, okay.
That we've set up
buoyed
around
or something. Yeah,
They're buoyed, yeah. If we can keep the tag on.
Yeah.
You know, some sharks will bite tags out of other sharks.
they're all manually applied in the way
Yeah.
I've seen you do it.
Exactly, yeah. I use the long tagging pole. But we also use, and the better method, even though it's labor intensive, is we can identify individuals from underwater video and photos.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at them for
Yeah.
unique
Very
scars.
distinct.
How
or
many
coloring.
sharks do you think you've tagged?
In terms of white sharks, I've actually tagged over 200.
There's an indigenous tribe, and a very interesting one in Indonesia called the Lamalarans. Are you familiar with them?
No.
They are sedentary people because they hunt a very rich bay. So they're not needing to travel semi-nomadically. They still hunt and gather, but they hunt the sea. They're not fishermen, they're hunters. So they have wooden boats with a pulpit and a guy on the front who's the harpooner. And they subsist off of I think it's about 25 sperm whales a year. It's their main thing that they're after, sperm whales. Their economy is based on sperm whale. They hunt devil rays and manta rays, some other marine mammals like orca. They're considered to be quite sustainable in their little area.
Cool.
Even though they're doing all that. So I interviewed a guy who went and lived with them for several years and had been on several sperm hunts and read his book and just was very taken by these people. And then I saw you tagging sharks, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a kind of more of a catch and release scenario. But you guys could just as easily be catching those sharks doing what you're doing. I was like, this guy is like one of the premier great white shark hunters in the world. You're literally throwing a harpoon at a shark. I can't believe it. So I would love to just hear how this works. Do you guys have spotter planes? How are you finding these sharks? And then what are they doing at the surface? Like, how does this all work? Because it's amazing. Like, you are kind of at the tip top of prowess when it comes to what you're doing with these animals. I mean, really, like, how many people in the world are doing this? Like,
Well, there are a lot of people tagging white sharks. I think we have a very unique method of doing it.
Okay.
I don't know anyone else who's doing it like we are. Just a little history. I as a fisheries biologist, I've worked with a lot of commercial and recreational fishermen over the 30 plus years I've been doing this. And one of them in particular, by the name of Billy Chapralis, has a harpoon vessel. And he's a
fisherman?
A tuna fisherman, yeah. And he may still be doing it. He used to harpoon tunas. And I hired him many years ago to harpoon tags into free swimming giant bluefin tuna. And so we were getting tags onto bluefin tuna doing this, and he developed a really neat technique. And so we got a bunch of money to then do it with basking sharks. And so he helped me tag, 40 plus basking sharks for work we were doing in the Gulf of Maine. And then when the whole white shark phenomenon kind of exploded in 2009, he was right there by my side, and he helped tag the first 5. I think together we tagged 15 the first 3 years.
I hope before I die, I get to tag a white shark. I mean, come on. All right, sorry, go on.
No, but
it's just amazing.
It is absolutely cool. So I got to give Billy a lot of credit for showing me how to adapt a lethal weapon into a tagging tool.
Right.
And then we took it a step further a couple of years after that in like 2013, when we started, instead of throwing the harpoon, just getting close enough to the shark where we could place the tag at the base of the dorsal fin using a small dart. And so now we don't actually throw it, but I can actually feel the shark.
Yeah, much more accurate,
and
probably.
be much more accurate and make sure that I'm not, damaging the animal. But it was really.
How do they react when you either throw or poke them with this thing?
Well, when we were throwing it, they would definitely take off. A lot of times they will react by, just darting off for maybe, 20, 30, 40 yards and then settle right out. Like more like they're spooked. They're surprised.
Sure.
It's like, it's like somebody perhaps sneaking up on you and piercing your ear.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt that much,
Yeah,
but
sure.
what the hell was that?
Right.
And especially a big top predator that's never
Not
ever
used to this.
touched. No one touches
I heard
me,
I heard a spear fisherman was talking about, sometimes when sharks get close, he'll take his spear gun and kind of nudge them out of the way and push them off. And then he was talking about great white coming in and pushing and sending him back, where he was like, oh, it's like, it doesn't move when it's too big and too heavy.
Yeah.
You must feel sometimes the resistance then when you're poking in like that.
Yeah, I mean, we use a really sharp needle and a sharp dart, so it goes in like butter.
Yeah.
But some of them will roll.
Wow.
Some of them we've had them roll or shoot up, and like, what the hell? One of them rammed the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was like, you don't do that to me.
What's going on in your chest when you're
when that starts happening?
When an
I'm
animal comes in, a deer comes in or something. Yeah, but even if you're just having a perfect smooth, you must have that like buck fever experience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there must not be many things in life that get your heart rate up like that.
It was deer. I mean, I've deer hunted, and that happened to me. My first deer, all the deer I've shot, it's happened to me. It's that moment.
Yeah.
And even after doing this for 10 years, free swimming white sharks, I still feel a little bit of anxiety as I'm out there waiting for that moment, because you don't want to screw up and you don't want to hurt the fish, and you got to know exactly when to pull the trigger. And so, but I get a lot of the credit, but I've got a guy, in a tower, John King, driving a boat that's putting me in the perfect position.
Yeah.
I have the plane in the air who told me where the shark is.
Yeah.
And I've got an assistant, another scientist, colleague of mine. She's getting all the data down and listening for the shark if it's tagged. So she's doing multitasking, saving GPS points and all that.
You're at the microphone, but you got a drummer and a bass player and a guitar player.
Exactly.
Tour manager.
Yeah. But unlike those guys, I'm not leaving the band, I'm not going out on my own, because without this band, I'm done.
Right.
But it is unique, and the sharks are, you ask, what are they doing in that shallow? And we think a lot about that, but there's only one thing nothing drives a big fish close to shore, because particularly around Cape Cod or anywhere in the Gulf of Maine, the shoreline is dynamic. There's tides, there's, in the case of Cape Cod, there's sandbars and shoaling and rip currents, and it's really challenging if you're 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 pound animal to be tight to shore. And so the only reason they're in there is because energetic payoff.
Yeah, food.
It's worth me risking my life to come in close to shore, because if I get one of those things, I might not have to feed for 2 weeks or 2 months.
They can go that long.
Yeah, there's all kinds of metabolic estimates out there. The first one said, a month easily, but that was published many years ago. The most recent says, well, probably, a couple of weeks they don't have to feed.
How many of sharks will you... So you got a spotter plane. And who's paying for all this? Obviously, this has got to be expensive to run the boat. Man, I know coming in off a boat trip with the costs, and then to run the plane, and all of you guys out there. Where's this funding coming from? Is it state, federal? Is it private?
It's a great question, because I work for the state of Massachusetts. I work for the Division Marine Fisheries, and in the early years, I had virtually no money for this, because, each state has its own priorities. State of Maine, it's all about lobster. State of Massachusetts, groundfish species, secondarily lobster. Not a lot of money in sharks, so there was no money to support my research. They do contribute these days, and they certainly cover my salary, which I can certainly thank them for. But, back in 2012-13, I met a woman named Cynthia Wigren who decided to start a nonprofit with the specific goal of raising money for my research.
That's cool.
And that's called the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy.
Okay.
And they fund...
I'm going to throw a little money at that, Grant.
I mean, to the tune of, $200,000-$300,000 a year into our research.
So listeners can donate to that.
Yeah, and if go to the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy Facebook page, Twitter, obviously, AtlanticWhiteShark.org is their website. They not only will facilitate our research and support the research and make it happen. But they're really good at taking what we find and giving it back to the public.
Yeah,
we've
in a
got
consumable way.
Yeah, in a consumable way. They have education and outreach programs. They have a shark center in Chatham where you can go see the gear we're using and videos of what we're doing and lifelike replicas of white sharks.
Cool.
And they're also keenly focused on public safety. They've got the Sharktivity app, which is free. You could see where our sharks are going on your phone.
Oh, no way, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sharktivity?
Sharktivity, it's called.
I'm going to need that because my wife has lost all interest in diving in Maine now. This year she's like, babe, why would we do that? No, just why would I do it? I want to be able to be like, look, they're all over here.
Because of that shark attack?
Yeah, which I want to get to. But, man, that's interesting. So they're pulling the primary funds.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's
from
really
from the private sector.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
We've been able to raise funding through various grant organizations, Save Our Seas Foundation, for example, and others. But in terms of the bread and butter of what we're doing, and they even support a full-time staff scientist who I work very closely with. She's amazing, Megan Winton. So they are just making it all happen.
That's cool.
And we probably wouldn't be anywhere to where we are right now without them. I know we wouldn't.
Yeah. How many sharks will you see in the summer or in the season?
Well, in terms of actual numbers of individuals, part of Megan's work is to do those analyses, which is part of that population study. But in terms of sightings, which means you could be looking at the same shark multiple times.
Right.
But it's not unusual to have literally hundreds of sightings over the course of the summer. And just all we have to do is look at our spotter pilot's data set, which we compile. Every time he sees a shark, he just hits a button on his handheld GPS. And so we can see, on the order of thousands of those over the course of years. And it's amazing when I plot those out because they're virtually everywhere.
Okay.
And we're primarily working along the outer Cape.
I'm like, Avani, it's not true. If you're listening, they're not everywhere.
But getting a better understanding what's happening in parts north in the Gulf of Maine is something we're focusing on in the coming years.
Yeah. So I learned about you initially because we had obviously a shark attack in that was 2020, right?
I think so, yeah.
What a year.
It was June of 2020.
Yeah. So
in Maine.
In Maine, and that had just never happened before. Or at least
second attack, first death, I think.
No,
right?
The other attack was another species, right? What was that, a bull shark?
No, I think it was. I think it's really the only well-documented attack, and certainly
wasn't there like
only fatal one.
mako bite or something?
Oh, you know what? It was a poor beagle bite on a diver.
Okay,
that's
thank
right.
you. But yeah, not lethal. But obviously, we had a lethal shark attack, and obviously wanted to know about it. I'm reading about it, and then your name came up as the biologist to identify a tooth fragment. I'm just curious. I want to be very respectful, obviously, to the family or anybody associated with it. I mean, this is one of those things I want to be able to talk about, but also you want to be really delicate about. But I am very curious about that day for you. I imagine that was like a memorable day, and I imagine quite a lot of bustle in your world and then amongst your colleagues and your community. And I'm just wondering, to whatever degree it's comfortable to talk about, I'm just curious what you can tell us about that actual event. Not because I don't want to sensationalize shark attacks or shark bites or whatever. I think, like you've pointed out, it's a unlikely thing to have happen to somebody, but it's also something that when it does happen, people really want to know about it. And I'm certainly very curious about it. As somebody who fishes and dives and chums the waters off the coast of Maine, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's shark attacks or any attack by an animal, I think, tends to get so much attention, more so than, car accidents, for example. You kind of shrug off a car accident. Oh, somebody died that's horrible. That's too bad. What's for dinner? But if you hear about, somebody mauled by a grizzly or a shark bite, an attack by a fatal one in particular, I think it really hits our core, an innate fear that we all have in us of being attacked and killed.
Back,
and
right?
it does. And I tell people, you can't just pull that fear out of people. I know we live in a modern society and we should, not be afraid of animals. But the truth is, we were alive a long time where that's all we cared about is not being able to kill and eat something ourselves and not be killed. Mm-hmm. And so
we definitely show up in kill sites, for other animals. Like, we have been prey, and we know that, and we see certain species fed on us. And incidentally, Grant, because I said I would bring it up, on the drive down here, I was showing Grant a video of a golden eagle grabbing a kid in a park in Montreal, which I then later found out was faked, and it looks very real. And I just thought, I was almost a little upset that it wasn't real, because the kid gets put down and you can't get it off the ground. It looks very real, and he's like, it's fake, and I was like, it can't be fake. But anyway, it does trigger that really primal, almost memory, genetic memory of this, right?
Yeah, I think it's justified. I mean, man, we all want to live and survive, and we spent so much time evolving in trying to survive. But, I remember the day quite well, and I remember all the days when I get those phone calls, and it always starts as rumors, right? And I have to say, almost all of it comes from the media, and it's the media, people that I know, local and otherwise, who have my number and start texting me, what have you heard about, a shark bite in Maine? And I say, I haven't heard anything. What do you mean? I mean, it's the tentacles of the news media are absolutely amazing. And of course, social media facilitates that. Mm-hmm. Well, I heard this or I heard that. So it'll be a Boston station, I think that particular day, which was, asking me, have you heard anything? Can you comment? I said, I have very good working relationships with most of the local media. And I said, no, I don't, but please feel free to call me or let me know when you learn something, because they're very good at it. I happened to be on my way to my son's baseball game, Little League game. And so I was kind of preoccupied getting him there, getting him set up and watching the game. But, I put out my normal feelers to other scientists and people I know regionally. What have you heard? What have you heard? Well, there's a rumor somebody was bitten. And then I had the Department of Environmental Management, the state of Maine, reach out to me through my director. As another state agency, state agencies and states work together. And so the director of the commissioner of that agency reached out to my director. He asked if I would be available to talk to him. So we started a text conversation, and he told me what was going on. And I was as shocked as anybody else, quite honestly, And it's not because I thought white sharks didn't occur in the Gulf of Maine, but I just felt that they were spread out over such a broad area, and statistically, this was the most improbable event. We had so few shark bites, and that's we always fall back on statistics, whether we're looking at car accidents or shark bites. And so when you look at hotspots around the world, you can identify them based on the frequency at which these events happen. And certainly the state of Maine was not one of those areas. And then he sent me a tooth fragment, right on my phone, during the first inning of the game, right? And I knew immediately in looking at that photograph that it was a white shark.
They'll lose pieces of their teeth and
the tips of their teeth, like a really, really sharp knife. They're delicate.
Brittle.
They're brittle. They'll break.
Okay.
And so bits of tooth broke off, and it's a really sad event. And then the details. They shared details with me over the course of the next 24 hours. And because I had so much experience not only working with this species, but also dealing with the general public relative to the presence of this shark, I think I was able to work with their public relations folks and in dealing with also the media. Yeah. And how we go about trying to learn more as much as we can. Of course, being sensitive to the victim and her family, and it's a tragic event and nothing anybody could have possibly predicted. Yep. Off the coast of Cape Cod, I'm quoted in a National Geographic article many years ago as saying it's not a matter of, if, it's a matter of when somebody is bitten because of the densities of sharks in this feeding area. I never would have said that about the coast of Maine.
Okay.
So I was
a bit north.
Yeah, it's even though it's it's north and the sharks occur there, it's not an area of high densities where we would expect that kind of probability. I mean, you don't have that many people in the water any given day like you do on Cape Cod.
Right.
And you don't have, the sharks are spread out over a very broad area where the seals are spread out over very broad areas. And so it was really a wake-up call to me as a scientist and to other scientists as well as to the general public and the state of Maine. And so, it's devastating. And, as the details unfold, you really start to, and honestly, from a personal perspective, I have that fear of this animal.
Yeah. Right.
Because I see it every day, and I see it as a big fish just swimming along that I put a tag in and I study. But there's this real, and you hate to say it, but what you could perceive as an evil side, and it's just a shark being a shark. It's attempting to feed. But
I'm sure deer feel that way about me when I'm in the woods. That makes sense. Yeah.
And so it's when they make a mistake, it can have devastating consequences. And so, but it was a wake up call as far as I'm concerned, and one that we decided to do a lot after that. And not only work with the state of Maine, but other scientists in the Gulf of Maine to try to learn more about this species in that region.
And then there must be like the scientific side and then the public relations side that both have to get dealt with, right? I'm sure Maine for its own tourism is like trying to do a cleanup job on the perception around that. Can you say anything about the conditions and then what sort of might have led to it? I mean, obviously not the fault of the victims. Like you said, it's such a rare thing to have happen, but then also sort of like being on the boogie board or surfboard, sitting at the top, creating a certain look or silhouette can provoke something like that, right? In the right circumstances. Is there anything that we know about what might have like led to that?
Well, this is a routine that, to my understanding, this individual did, quite a bit, almost on a daily basis, swimming, and she was with her daughter, and just moving across a cove that's, not particularly deep and not particularly far from shore. She was, by all accounts, wearing a shorty wetsuit.
Okay.
And, the swimming, the splashing, obviously in the eyes of that particular shark represented, an image of a potential prey item.
It's wild to think about, like a little bit of like a focus lock where it's like, yep, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think that the decisions can be made very quickly in some cases,
as
with
you
these
sort
sharks.
of demonstrated by what you experienced.
Exactly.
As well.
That shark reacted, and I think, and I don't have a lot of empirical data to show this yet, but the more we study the behavior of these animals, I think that when a white shark or any shark gets into a heightened state of feeding mode, where it's really in a predatory strategy to strike, I think the decision making could potentially be flawed. And, as evidenced when that shark jumped at me under the pulpit, and perhaps when victims have been bitten on Cape Cod over the last several years, or their surfboards, as well as when this person was struck off of the state of Maine, where that shark, basically made the decision irrational, but perceived this individual as a potential prey item. Certainly there's plenty of seals in that area. There's other bait in the area. Commercial fishermen reached out to me and said that, there's mackerel that move into that cove certain times of the day on certain tides. And so all these factor in. But ultimately, I'll never get into the brain of that fish.
Right.
We've seen the shark that jumped at me again.
Yeah. Oh, you have?
Yeah, we've seen it again, and it didn't display any of that behavior, which tells me that, it was a different state of mind, if you will.
Not that shark's general behavior, basically.
Well, maybe when it gets into that heightened state of, time to feed.
Right.
Maybe it's made a couple of stabs at seals and failed.
Yeah.
And so it's really, and we've seen this, where a shark will move into a seal, miss, circle around, maybe come back out, go back in, circle around, and really appear to be frustrated. Appear to be frustrated, like, I am so close, I want that meal, and I can't get to it. What happens to its decision-making at that moment?
Yeah.
And it's going to be really hard to quantify.
My decision-making is not very good when I'm frustrated.
Yeah. Frustrated and hungry.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any accounts of a white shark actually eating a human?
I believe there are accounts from various stomach analyses that have had human parts in the stomachs of sharks, including white sharks. I think there's a famous case off of New Jersey in 1913 or 1918. I'd have to look that up. I should know it off the top of my head. But there was a number of shark attacks over a period of just 2 weeks off the New Jersey coast in the early 1900s. And a fisherman later caught a white shark that had, I believe, a piece of the victim in its stomach.
Wow.
So rarely do they actually consume, to my knowledge, the whole victim. But they will, if it bites an arm, the arm will go down into the stomach.
In this scenario that happened, was it exsanguination that was the sort of ultimate cause of death for this person?
Yeah.
And kind of in the aftermath, I want to kind of come back more generically to impacts of shark bites, but was there, one of the things I wondered about that was how many fishermen were out trying to find that shark after, or was there any effort from the, obviously if that happens with a bear or a cat, they typically go to try to find that animal. Was there any kind of response like that, either privately or publicly?
No, I didn't, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
What we do see, and I think it's the age of social media, is suddenly the reports of dead seals start coming
up,
in, and photos of what people think are white sharks. So that bumps up very quickly. So a lot of ocean sunfish photos will come to us, or videos, or basking shark photos, or carcasses of seals floating. Which is great. We encourage the public to share that information with us because we learn from it. Yeah. But you definitely get that spike.
Sure.
And of course,
we get a lot of mountain lion photos in Maine.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah. So that does happen.
Okay. Outside, I want to kind of step away from this particular case, but when someone's bitten by a shark, you obviously have tremendous mechanical damage that's done, and then I would assume that there's biological issues too, infection and things like that. What is the aftermath of a shark bite for a survivor, and what are typical injuries like, and how survivable are these things, and are there long-term problems after the bleeding has ceased and after the surgeons have got to you?
Well, it's really like any other traumatic injury. Anything that causes tissue loss, blood loss. Yeah. And so, we've had a victim on Cape Cod, a bunch of years ago, 2012, where he was struck down around the foot in the leg, the calf primarily. And so the damage was largely superficial because, in my opinion, it was more of what we call a test bite versus an all-out predatory strike. And so when you get that low level of tissue damage, which is still traumatic, and you don't hit any major vessels, the healing would be standard with any kind of tissue damage.
They don't have any unique bacterial load or anything like that?
Any marine animal will have its own unique bacteria.
But it doesn't lead to massive infection or anything.
Typically, if an individual is sensitive to marine bacteria, then I've had friends of mine, step on an oyster shell and develop an infection. So you'll get that happening. Okay. So obviously a heavy dose of antibiotics is what most doctors, all doctors will prescribe and apply. And so it really boils down to, how close or how traumatic the injury is to major blood vessels.
Yeah, can you keep your blood in the bucket?
That's basically what it is.
Those teeth, can you tell us a little bit? And another question I have is it that jaw protracts or does the face retract? Because you see right at the moment of the bite all that gum material and everything. What's going on mechanically there? And what are the teeth like?
Another very unique aspect of shark species is that they have a jaw that's, not fixed.
Oh, okay.
So the our upper jaw is fixed to our skull, right? Our lower jaw is supported by muscles and tendons. In the case of the shark, both jaws are supported by muscles and tendons.
Springy stuff.
Yeah, and so that allows the jaw to be protrusible.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens in the case of the white shark when it's reaching out to bite.
Yeah.
It allows it to get more leverage. And what's really cool about white sharks is when you look at smaller white sharks, relative to the size of the animal, the muscle mass isn't very big. As the shark gets bigger, that relative proportion of muscle really beefs up as it goes through, because it's shifting from feeding on fish to feeding on marine mammals.
Tougher
and
stuff.
so it's bulking up.
Yeah.
Its body shape changes. It becomes faster, more powerful. Its tooth shape actually changes.
Really?
From one that is sharply pointed for grabbing fish,
Yeah.
because they're losing teeth through their entire life.
Right.
And the ones that are replacing it are those perfectly triangular,
Yeah.
serrated cutting tools.
Okay.
And their jaw musculature becomes beefy, stronger,
Yeah.
and so they're able to really exert literally thousands of pounds of pressure
Okay.
with that jaw and divorce the rest of their head from it,
Wow. How much bite force is there? I mean, when I pull up a fish that's been bitten by a shark, it's so clean and surgical to cut. Will it go right through hard osseous tissue, or do they have enough bite force for that?
Yeah, they can go through a turtle shell. They
Wow.
can go bite a seal right in half through its backbone.
Oh my gosh.
So they have tremendous amount of force.
Yeah.
1,000 pounds of pressure.
Okay. And then sort of changing gears as we wrap it up today. Man, this is fascinating. I could do this for 10 hours. But I want to hear a little bit about, well, first of all, after this happened in Maine, it must have broadened your perspective about the northern Gulf of Maine. How are sharks, I hear all the time that the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming waters. How are sharks adapting to the Anthropocene, really, like how, to the changes we've created? How are they moving north the way our lobsters are migrating north? Are they going to be continuing to migrate north? And what's sort of the prognosis? Are we going to, do you see us being able to coexist with these animals effectively into the future? Or are we going to create conditions that are inhospitable to them? Like, where's this all headed?
Those are great questions. And when it comes to climate science and the impacts on species that occur in the Gulf of Maine, there have been a number of publications that have qualified and quantified to some extent the risk of climate change impacting populations. And for some species, it's quite traumatic. I don't think we've really worked it out with sharks. We're definitely seeing shifts in distribution. As a matter of fact, just in the southern Gulf of Maine, we're seeing species that we do not normally see in those areas now appearing. Off the coast of Long Island, we're seeing blacktip sharks more frequently. Okay. That's considered to be a tropical, subtropical species that will not venture this far north. So we're also seeing bull sharks off the coast of Long Island. I think when it comes to Gulf of Maine endemic sharks, like the white shark, like the mako, the porbeagle, thresher shark, species that have been coming to the Gulf of Maine and moving as far north as Canada as long as we've ever documented their existence. So we're not seeing a shift in the distribution per se. And after the event off the coast of Maine, the tragic fatal shark attack, there was a lot of people that just blatantly said, this must be climate change. We never saw white sharks before.
But they want to call everything climate change sometimes. I know. It feels like,
Yeah, well, yeah, they do. And but when we look at historical records of white sharks, we know dating back to the 1800s, they've been well documented. Okay, yeah. So, but we do see a growing population of white sharks, and that's largely, again, because of conservation efforts that have been put in place. I think what's going to be interesting is see how far some of these southern species of shark penetrate the Gulf of Maine, because I think that's going to happen. And then in terms of our sharks that are already here or visiting here, how long they stay. We may see the white shark season. I describe it as being basically from June through November, maybe into early December. But will they begin to stay longer?
Yeah.
Because their movements are mediated by water temperature.
Right.
And so if water temperatures remain elevated in the late fall into the early winter, and there's plenty of food around, which we know there is, the white sharks will stay longer. The porbeagles will be here longer. The makos will stay longer, the threshers. And then we'll see perhaps them shift even further north into higher latitudes.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of an interesting time to be watching what's going on. And it may not happen at the time scale that I'm alive and doing this, but certainly we think that the data we're collecting now will be instrumental at perhaps seeing how things go over the next 20, 30 years.
Okay. One of the last questions I have for you is, as somebody who hunts and gathers, and I would love your professional opinion about, and as somebody who is okay with the idea of take and who has hunted and everything. I occasionally get opportunities to fish shark, and I don't often do it. Occasionally, I've gone out. I fish not for sport. I fish for food, and so I'm not interested in catch and release fishing. It doesn't excite me. Is there room for, we talked before about the problems of industrial fishing, just like with whales. I mean, that wasn't that these lamellarians were taking a few sperm whales a year. It was industrial level whaling was the problem. When it comes to sharks, the conservation voices have gotten very strong, and I don't want to be participating in something that can't be sustainable. But at an individual scale, if once a year or every once in a while I wanted to take a shark that, obviously not going to be a white shark, but sharks that there is legal take for. Do you think this is ethical, unethical at this point in history? I guess where do you see all that? Because, you're around fisheries all the time as a biologist. And I'm just curious because I don't want to be called out for, doing something that is blatantly unethical.
Well, no, I don't. What tends to cloud issues these days is everybody has a voice, right? Mm-hmm. Through various social media vectors and otherwise.
My wife says the same thing. All the crazies have a platform now.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm calling anybody crazies yet. But
no, that's me. Yeah, sorry, that's me.
But this idea that, and I think it's just personal opinion, that you shouldn't be able to harvest something, just because it's, someone thinks you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. I disagree with. I actually believe in the system I work for. As a fisheries scientist, our goal is to make decisions, that allow for sustainable harvest. There may be species where that could never happen. They reproduce at such a low rate that mm-hmm. any harvest, and perhaps that's some of the marine mammals, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the dusky shark, which remains overfished, and we're having trouble bringing it back. But I've eaten my share of sharks, and I'll even admit to killing sharks over the course of my career. Mm-hmm. Sometimes for science, sometimes simply for consumption.
What do you like to eat for shark?
I think mako and thresher.
Those are the two
black-tip are excellent
those
sharks.
Those are who I'm thinking about right now. Yeah,
many of the carcharodid sharks, the requiem sharks, are delicious eating. But if the U.S. government and state governments, through their fisheries agencies, tell me that I can harvest, one short-fin mako shark per trip at the minimum size of 72 inches for males, then they base that regulation on the work that they've done, the research that has been conducted that says if you do this and adhere to these regs, just like any other regulation put out by a natural resource agency, you will still have a sustainable population, then I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And this was a real battle for me, I will tell you, 10, 15 years ago when I used to go to shark fishing tournaments where, you'd have 100, 200 boats all going out and trying to catch a big fish. All the meat was being consumed at the end of the day, so it wasn't strictly for sport. There was a bounty on those fish because they were making, they were getting prizes. But again, the animals were harvested, they were consumed, and all the state and regs were being, and federal regs were being followed. So I was being destroyed by various conservation groups for aiding and abetting shark killers.
Yeah.
All I said was, I'm sampling at these events because we're getting tissues to learn about these animals. And as long as they're abiding by state and federal regulations, I have no problem with it.
Yeah.
But my philosophy didn't agree with that of others.
Well, that's really, first of all, thank you for saying that, because I know I'm asking you some questions today that I know you've got to be careful about a lot of different, there's a lot of different stakeholders at the table.
Right.
But as somebody who, I'm not going to go out every day and harvest a fish. I mean, this would
I know
be something I wouldn't, no, I know. I'm just saying, as somebody who would do it a lot less than that, it's nice to hear, because it's something I'd like to be able to participate in. Nan, I really appreciate all these things you've shared today. I guess my closing question is, and I kind of have a sense, because hearing that these animals have been around for so long, surviving whatever took the dinosaurs out, seems like they can bounce back pretty well and hold their own. But looking out at the changes that are happening on our planet, and some of which seem like such, potential dire consequences. Do you feel pretty optimistic about sharks into the future, or is there any real significant problems that you see?
Well, I think it really depends on where we are. Here in the U.S., I'm very, very comfortable with the paradigm we've set up for shark management. I think that over time, populations will come back, and as long as we don't change anything dramatically in terms of the mandates that are currently regulating how we manage fisheries, then I think that sharks will come back and already have. My bigger concerns are other parts of the world where there's been, simply a lack of any kind of management relative to shark populations, or perhaps even in developing countries where that's not a high priority for them.
Not well enforced.
Well, exactly. So, there are parts of the world where we do have real problems with shark populations. But really the greatest threat is our overharvest on a global scale. And so that's where we really need to pay attention. And it's really it's up to us, in well-developed countries to go out there and not necessarily impose what we're doing, but help educate and help assist, in any way as even economically, to make it so that, we can reduce, harvest and have some sort of management in place in these areas.
Well, I'll just say, again, thank you for today. Greg, it's been so cool to meet you. For months now, I've been thinking that is one of the most badass hunters that exists on the planet, man, out there doing what you're doing. I mean, really, it's cool. And
thank you.
It's cool to see, and it's cool that what you do gives back so much to all of us. So thank you for that. You mentioned the nonprofit. We're going to put links to your TED Talks.
Awesome.
Is there anything else, anywhere else you want people to go? Is there any social media, books, anything like that you want to promote?
Yeah, well, I wrote a book called The Shark Handbook, and it is out. I'm doing a third edition now, and hopefully that'll be out this summer. And it's a good basic guide to understanding sharks and how they live and how we study them.
Yeah.
It's basic. It's not overwhelming in terms of scientific jargon, and it's a great way to start into the shark field. Lots of great photos and stuff. So I, certainly point folks in that direction.
Okay, great. They can get that anywhere they buy books?
Yeah, anywhere they can buy books, the Shark Handbook. And there's another one out called The Great White Shark Scientist, written by Cy Montgomery, and it's about our work on Cape Cod.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So that's a great children's book. And so, and AtlanticWhiteShark.org, the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy.
Great. Thanks so much for today.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.